Hello grade 1 twos. Welcome back to music class today. We are going to do a quick recap of what we did our last lesson where we talked about the treble clef. Hopefully you took some time and used your finger to trace the treble clef. And we talked about the treble clef being where the higher instruments generally play their notes found in the treble clef staff. We briefly talked about the staff that was created with drawing in the same direction, 5 lines, and as soon as you draw 5 lines, you've immediately created 4 spaces, and that's the treble clef. And then we begin to put notes on those lines and spaces, but they have a very different positioning on an instrument, whether it be a piano, guitar, ukulele, any instrument, depending if they're positioned on the lines and the spaces of the treble clef, top treble clef, or if they're positioned in the lines and spaces of the bass clef. And that's who we're going to introduce today. So we had talked about the top treble clef and the bottom bass. Now, the bass clef is a much easier notation to draw. So actually what I want you to do, very similar when we were practicing drawing our treble clef, is to put your finger on the center of it, and then it follows all the way around with 2 dots behind it. It actually looks like, if you drew another one right beside it, like a heart. It looks like half a heart with the 2 dots behind it. And it is positioned on the bottom staff, and it has the 5 lines and 4 spaces where it sits as well. Now, you will have received one of these in your packet this week, and what I'd like you to do is the same thing we did last week. Just simply take your finger, draw around it, maybe take a pencil, pardon me, draw around it, and then maybe take a highlighter and draw around it. That gives you a little extra practice for that. Now, when you hear the word bass, it's actually spelled B-A-S-S. And it's also an Italian word, and sometimes it refers to low, deep waters, that kind of thing. And the bass clef is where we would position the notes that we wanted to have to be played that are the deeper, the lower. Sometimes people would call them the darker notes, whereas the top notes would be the higher, the brighter notes. And so that's where we position that low part. Now, you've heard the word bass many, many ways. Now, this is spelled B-A-S-S. But in music, you would have the players that would sing the bass. There's many instruments. You have the bass guitar. You have an electric bass. You'd have different string instruments that have the name bass in front of them. And they're all referencing to the lower notes. You have the bass drum and that kind of thing. And anytime you hear that, that would make you think of that deeper sound instead of that higher sound, that lower sound instead of that higher, brighter sound. So that's where we get the bass. You'll also find in your packet this week a small worksheet, and this is giving you opportunity to practice that bass clef, drawing them. They're all dotted here, so you just connect the dots and then draw some in these boxes and then actually put them on the staff. Now, what I want you to notice when you put them on the staff here, you have to be sure that you actually begin it on the correct staff line. So there are 5 lines. So the second from the top line, okay, that is the line that it actually starts on. Remember last week when we were talking about the treble clef, where it sat, the heart of it, this part here, wrapped around what we'll know better as the G line. So it was called sometimes the G clef. The bass clef, a little later on, we'll start talking about the names of the lines and the spaces. But for now, this second line from the top, or 4th line from the bottom, is actually going to be called the F line. And so what do you suppose sometimes they would refer to the bass clef as? The F clef, because it actually wraps around the F line. So for our purposes and for 99% of the time, you will hear it just referred to as the bass clef. So that's what I'd like you to work on as far as some new work this week. Now, the other thing I wanted to do was I wanted you to take a flashcard little quiz. So I had a whole bunch of flashcards here, okay? And what I want you to do, and obviously I can't hear you, but pretend like I can. When I hold it up, I want you to tell me the note, the proper name of it, or the symbol, the proper name of the symbol, and then we'll go back through it, and some of the notes you'll yell out the number of beats that note gets. So let's start off with this guy. This is called a, and it can stand this way or this way. Quarter note. Now this is what we just did, and it's a little bit smaller in my cue card, but that's called a bass clef. This is from last week, and this is called a treble clef. This pair is called eighth notes. This note is called a half note. This note is called a whole note. This note is called a dotted half note. This note is called an eighth note. This rest is called an eighth rest. This is the rest that hangs down from the line, so it is called a whole rest. And this is another rest. It is called a quarter rest. And then this rest sits up on the line, and it's called a half rest. And the way we tell it, remember I said it looks like a little hat when it's all by itself, and the whole one hangs down worth a greater value. Okay, so that's a quick review of that. Let's just talk about the actual note, okay? Values, okay? So this was the quarter note worth 1 beat. Treble clef and bass clef. This card is a dotted half note worth 3. This card is a whole note worth 4. Hope you can see these. And this is a half note worth 2. And then there's a pair of eighth notes. Each one is worth half a beat. But if we put them together combined, because 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 1 beat. So this one would be worth an eighth note plus an eighth note together equal 1 quarter note. All right, so that's a quick review of that. Now, the other thing I just want to quickly talk about today, because it's going to become more and more important the more and more we play. And when we're playing the bells, we talked a little bit about this. And these are what are called dynamic symbols. And the P stands for the word actually piano, which means soft. And the F stands for the word forte, which means loud. So interestingly enough, the piano gets its name from the word soft. And the full name of the piano is the pianoforte, but we shortened it to just calling it a piano. But when you call it a piano, for instance, if you said, go play the piano, you're actually saying, go play the soft, because it's got its name from the fact that it was an instrument that could play soft and loud. And a lot of instruments are actually like that. You can play just about any instrument depending on how hard you strike the keys or pull the string or how hard you blow on it. It can create different levels of dynamics, soft or loud. So we're going to explore that a little bit more, especially once we get back together and start with some more instrument playing. But that's what I want you to do for this week. So we're going to finger around our bass clef, and then just the one sheet this week of actually drawing the bass clef symbol. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you soon.